right? So let's get up to speed here. We so far have built an Express server, and that's here in this folder, which you can find in my live coding repo, and I'll link to that. It's a basic Express server. We wrote some routes that had just kind of a simple thing they were sending back. So repeating a word, weaving two things back and forth. We were using body parser to parse some JSON in a post body. And then just yesterday, we added a router. So this is a part of Express that's made to just handle routes specifically. And we put it in a different file. It's over here, api.js. And so this is where we'll build our API today. And when you have a router like that, you use it. So app.use, you give it the path that's going to start all of those routes, and then the router itself. And then since we last talked about this, I added a couple things to kind of get us up and running today. In the package.json, I added this dev dependency on nodemon, and then these scripts, so we can start our server with npm run start, and then these to get our database up and running. So db create actually will create the database. This is also, if you download this repo, you can run these commands and get up and running. And I would encourage you to put this in the projects that you do too, especially if it's like a phase interview or something like that, and you know someone's going to be reviewing your code and will need to have the database, will need to have some seed data, that sort of thing. Put some code in like this, some scripts in to help make that easier. So this one creates the database if you don't already have it created. This one, db init, runs loadschema and runs seed. And loadschema pumps in that schema. Seed gives us the seed data. Yeah, Glenn David? Yes. Yep.
I don't see a Zoom link.
In phase 2, in the phase 2 channel. Yep. So does that make sense, the scripts?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And yeah. So we're going to need to add some database functions to not just get all contacts, but get a specific contact, add a contact, delete a contact. We'll do that in a minute. But let's first map out what our REST API is going to look like. All right, so yesterday we talked about what REST APIs are and why we use them and how we use them and the different methods that we use to access them. So let's brainstorm here together for a second. We've got contacts database. So it's really simple, just kind of one table. And we want to expose this through a REST API to our users, our clients. So what are the routes that we want to create? Okay, so it's going to be a get route. And what's the path?
Do we have where's our database being stored?
You mean where's the database functions?
Or, well, isn't the route going to be like?
Yeah, so I'll help you out on this one. So we want to get something. And so what's the thing that we want to get?
The schema SQL, right?
What we want to think not in terms of the code, but just kind of generally, like what is the thing that we want people to be able to get? We created this contacts table.
So we want them to be able to get the contacts.
We want them to be able to get the contacts, yep. So one route could be get
all
why
contacts.
isn't my, that's weird. My cursor isn't working. One moment, please. Adam is not being very helpful. Okay.
Adam just crash?
Well, it just stopped using, I couldn't go right or left, which is generally pretty necessary. So let's try this again. There we go. All right, so get contacts. And remember, our endpoints or our routes for an API like this are nouns, not verbs, right? So this route, this path is contacts. And almost always, there's some disagreement about this, but almost always you want your nouns to be plural, right? So you would say get contacts. And then if you wanted to get a specific contact, what would that path look like? Yeah, so get contacts slash, and then we'll have them enter some sort of ID, which we can indicate that here the same way Express does by ID. Okay. So we've got two routes. We've got get the collection. So this is the collection resource. And do you remember what this one is called? The instance resource. So that's a collection, that's an instance. What else do we want to be able to do?
What other information's in there? Their name?
Yeah, it's first name, last name, and phone number.
We want to be able to create a new contact.
Okay, we want to be able to create a contact.
Post.
So this is to create. So what HTTP method should we use?
Post.
Post? Anybody else? Any other thoughts? Put? Either one works. They behave differently, so it's important to know which one you're using and why. But in my experience, there's no common consensus on use one over the other. That's the way to do it. So you get to make that choice for yourself. If I'm creating something, am I using a put or a post? And let's do post. And so if we're going to do that, what's the route? If we're going to create a contact, you're posting to contacts. Exactly. Okay. What if we want to update? So remember, this is modeling the CRUD. Create, read, update, and delete. What if we want to update a contact?
That's when I use put.
Okay.
I don't know why I just use put for update and post for create.
So you could use put or post here. And I want to make sure we catch the difference here. So if we're doing an update and we did a post, for example, contacts. So if we were doing post, not put for a second, what we could send to that route would be something like, let me look at the database. So here's the database that we've got, the table. And right now, Bonnie is contact ID 1, and her phone number isn't in there. She said, none of your business. So what if we put in a phone number for her? Of course, we'll put in a fake phone number. But let's update this so that we give her a phone number. So how would we do that? If we're posting to contacts, we'd be posting to contact ID 1. And what are we going to send in the body? So it's going to be some sort of JSON. And we could have it be an object that says phone num, right? So it'd be like this, phone num, and then 555 123 4567 4567. Okay. So this works. You can do this.
It knows to replace that with the old one. I mean, I guess that's what you write in the function, right?
Right. So on the back end, we could implement it in this way so that if we send just one piece of data, just that one piece of data is updated. Now, if we did update instead with put contacts, contact 1, what would need to go in the body? Anybody know?
If you're just updating a number?
Yeah, so we're still doing the same thing. We just want to update the phone number. But remember that put is idempotent. It's that funky word that we saw yesterday, idempotent. And idempotent means if I run the same thing twice or any number of times, it will always produce the same result. So what that means here is that if we just do this, phone num, and then 555, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If we do just this, it's going to wipe out Bonnie's first name and last name. And why is that? Because when you do a put like this, you know, the kind of take home from this, the thing that you need to know about this is when you do a put like this, you actually have to include all the fields that you want that thing to have. So it needs to have first, how do we do it? First underscore name, Bonnie, and last name, and I think it's Shulkin, right?
So you're saying in order for you not to wipe out what you originally had, you need to add more information to make it so they can decipher which is which?
You need to send along the same information. So if you want to update only one field, you have to send all the fields, but just change the one that you want to change.
If you're using put, but post is a better way to do it.
Yeah, so there are some advantages to post, namely that you don't have to send all that data along. And so that's one of the reasons that I might tend to choose that. I know that someone could probably make a good argument for using put for an update. You know, there's some aspect in which it's clear, like when you do it this way, you know exactly what your thing is going to look like once the operation is complete. So there's that. But just to kind of hammer this home, one second. So here's the way to think about it, this idempotent thing. So when you make an idempotent request, you know, so when you use put, it always has to have the same effect. So imagine for a second you you put so say we have a contact, and you make a put that has a first name. So we create a contact and it has a first name. Then you put on that same contact a last name, and then you go back and you put on that resource, you know, that same thing, first name again, but the resource already has a last name. So you sending, so let me, I'll paste this up here because I had it written out because it's a little confusing, but it's important to know. So the example I have here is from an application. So say you have your resource here is like a, you know, college application or something like that. So you first create an application and all it has is a first name. Then you run a put request on that same application, but just include the last name. Yeah, and then so if you were to run that put request one more time and just put a first name, the resource already has a last name, but running these requests, so setting a first name, has different effects, right? Is this making any sense that when you run this put, adding a first name, and when you run this put, adding a first name, the object looks different at the end?
Because if you put on the resource a first name again and don't give it a last name, it'll delete the last name and it'll only have the first name.
Right. Yep. So yeah, so this I don't want to get too much into this because the take home of understanding this is when you send a put, you need to send all the fields, right?
There's
Yeah.
one question on this. So when you say that it wipes out the field, is it replacing it with null? Like what is actually getting put into those fields?
So that depends on how you implement it. So on the back end, you would implement it a certain way. But the thing about put is what you're saying is make this thing, so in this case a contact, look exactly like this. And if you didn't include a last name, you're saying make this thing not include a last name.
So Justin,
Yeah.
sorry, just for clarity. So on line 1, you say you put an application with the first name, so you've done a put request with the first name, and then you do a put request in the same application with the last name. Does it wipe out the first name?
Yeah, that's where I was getting a little mixed up myself about this. So put it with the first name. Yeah, so I guess the thing about this example is we're imagining right now that put doesn't behave the way that we're talking about. So it's like if you tried to do this where you put just a last name and we allowed that, where you just put a last name, if you did one more put here and tried to change the first name again, that would be breaking this rule that we have, this idempotency rule, where whatever you send over needs to be the thing that it is. Yeah.
So then it seems like put works where if the field is empty, you can use put and put something in there and it'll still hold it in, it'll still hold it as a whole. Like it'll still have the first name, and then because there was no last name yet, you put that field in. So it still holds the first and the last. If you try to change the first but don't include the last, then you're gonna break it and you'll only have, without including all the information,
Yes.
trying to change something that already exists, a field that already exists, it's gonna, you have to give all the information if you want it all to stay put.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I understand.
So is it like, this is how I'm thinking about it. So you put all the data versus post a piece.
Yes.
Something like that.
Yep. That's the way to think of it. Hope I haven't confused things more. So for that reason, I would say let's do for create, just for the heck of it, let's do put, because that's an easy one. When you're creating something, you're giving it everything that you want to give it. And then if we want to update it, we'll use post, which gives us that flexibility to update only one field.
I like that. That's a little bit easier.
Like this. Okay. And what's the last one that we want to, the last
Delete.
part of this? Yes, we want to delete. And what's the HTTP method we use for that?
Delete.
Delete. And what's the route?
Contacts. And it could be slash and then whatever the ID is.
Yeah, and we want it to be slash, right? We want it, we
Don't want to delete all the contacts.
currently, it wouldn't make sense to have a scenario in which you delete the contacts collection. Like we wouldn't want anybody from the API to be able to do that. So we want there to be an ID here, right? ID. Should there be an ID here for creating one?
No, because it creates it. We don't know what the ID is like.
Yep, there should not, because when we send it to this, it's going to create its own ID. The database will know what ID to give it.
So this is down. So the reason why it doesn't create an ID is it because the GET request is already requesting it to have an ID?
So when we're creating a contact, so think about how you add something to a database. So if you have an ID field in your database, you can insert something and give it an ID explicitly, but depending on how you configure your schema, you can also insert something and only give it the first name, last name, and phone number, and let the database automatically assign an ID. And that's the behavior that we want for our API. We don't want people using our API to be guessing at what ID their contact should have. We want to be controlling that on the back end. And so we don't have them specify it. We just have them run a put to contacts.
You said that's standard practice to let your database manage IDs and such like that.
Yeah. Yep. Because again, like, you know, no matter what the scenario, your clients of your API may not have any idea what the IDs look like. And so if they tried to create something, they're like, I'm going to pick ID 50, 50 might already be taken. And so, you know, maybe there's a scenario in which it would make sense, but for the intents and purposes of today.
Like separating the concerns.
Yeah. You're empowering your users to manage only what they really should be managing. Cool. So are we good on this? So what we need to do is create a couple database functions. And so this will give us a little bit of experience with SQL and this question that many people have asked, which is, how do I connect my a database to an Express server? Right? A number of you have asked that question. And so we got started with that with Bonnie. She created this new database utilities file and connected using PG Promise to this database. And I named the database something different. So it's contacts REST API. I want to make sure that it's the same here in the package JSON. Yeah, contacts REST API, contacts REST API. Okay. So we already have a get all contacts, and we can use that for our /contacts route to get the whole collection. So what do we need next? So we'll need a create contact.
But shouldn't post go below all your gets, or is that just me tripping out?
So when we're talking about a database, there's no post yet.
Okay.
Right? So we're thinking specifically about database functions. Okay? So we'll want to be able to create a contact. We'll want to be able to delete contact, update contact, and get an individual contact. So let's do that one. That'll be similar to what we've already got. So const get contact, and then what do we take in?
ID.
Yep. Well, in this case, yeah, just an ID. And so what do we want here?
Return database.any.
Return database dot, and now instead of any, I would choose here one. And this is part of PG Promise, is that you can specify using this function that you want one result. And what that means, I'm pretty sure, is if there's nothing returned from this, you'll get an error. The promise will reject. So, yeah.
So, is there a significant difference between PG and PG Promise?
PG uses callbacks, and PG Promise uses promises. So these two different ways of doing async in JavaScript. And once you've got a handle on callbacks, I think you're going to like promises, and pretty much from here on out, you'll use promises wherever possible. There is actually there's a new syntax that's kind of increasingly being adopted in browsers and Node and whatever, which is async await. And if you want to have some fun on a break, look up async await. It's going to be great when it's like widely supported, and it's just currently not super widely supported. So database, we're going to make a query. What's the query going to look like? Select star from contacts where Yep, where contact ID equals, and then,
It's the object.
yeah, the thing that we pass in. And so tell me if you're familiar with this, that when we're making database queries like this and we want to kind of paste something into the query, you want to use, I believe this is called parameterized queries. Meaning you put a little 1 in here, and then as the second argument to this, you give it an array where the first argument is what you want to paste in. Does that make sense?
Say that again.
Yeah. So here, we want the ID, but there's an important reason that we don't want to paste the ID right in there. So, you know, using one way we could do that is we could do this syntax and then put in an ID, but we don't want to do it that way. We want to use PG Promise's built-in parameterized query ability here, which is we give this a number 1 for the first element in the array, and then here in the we give it an array where the first element is the ID.
I guess I missed. So you don't want to do string interpolation. Do you? Okay.
Right. Yeah, you do not want to construct the string yourself, and who knows why?
Is it because of SQL injection?
Yeah. Yep.
I'm just curious about why that particular code type that you don't use for string interpolation.
Because you can go on multiple lines easily. And just because I like looking at SQL queries that are kind of spaced out. So he's asking why use this backtick for this string? Because the backtick, these template strings can insert some, some variables like right in the string. We're just using it so that we can put it on multiple lines. So we can put this query on multiple lines, right? Because if you do this with a single quote, it's not going to work.
So is that a security thing? Like you said, SQL injection. Is that?
Yeah, so people can't insert like hacking.
So you can't modify the query.
Right. So the extent to which I understand SQL injection is someone who is clever could access your API and say, give me the contact at ID. And then instead of saying ID is 1, they would say ID is, delete star where, something. You could, in certain scenarios, you could actually inject a piece of, someone could inject a piece of SQL into your SQL, and all of a sudden you're running some code on your database that is malicious.
Malicious code.
Yeah. And so the PG library, the PG Promise library, has this kind of syntax, this way of doing parameterized queries, so that it can check this for malicious SQL injection. Clear on that?
Where we can get this information like about all this stuff, to use these $sign and to use that any or
PG Promise documentation.
Say it again.
PG Promise documentation.
Yep.
I'll try to find the link and put it on Face too.
Yeah, in my making I did this. I don't see it.
Uh-huh.
I just offer a quick resource on this that helps. So there is a project in phase 2 where you are, I think it's the integration testing one, and it actually is a project that Tanner built, and he uses this PG Promise library to do database queries. And so it's just a great example of how to do simple queries.
Video.
No, it's in the integration testing module in phase 2. It's one of the exercise links. It's like a whole program that just uses PG Promise. Yeah, if you just read that, it'll
Cool. And say one more time what the project is.
it's the integration testing module, and let me see.
Yeah, if you can pull that up.
Yeah, for sure.
Mira, the other thing is here, I mean, the first place that I would go is the PG Promise documentation. And we all know that some documentation can be wanting. But here I believe is where they're covering this. So you've got the query, and then it talks about the format of the values. So you can use $1. You can also pass, for the values, you can pass an object, and then you can access it with the property name. So this is where it talks about it. I don't know if it has any examples that it's going to show you. Yeah, so here's an example of not even using the $1, but using the property name. So you can also do $, and then the property name, and pass it an object where there's a columns and there's a table, right? Does that make sense? Yeah, and up here they're using the $number notation, and so then this is an array. So go to the documentation with this, but if you have questions, let us know. So great. Where contact ID is 1, and then sometimes, I don't know, we're using DB1, and so this is a little bit redundant, but you can also do limit 1 here. And yeah, I mean, I think there's not a super compelling reason to do both, but I just like to do that. Cool. So we've got an individual contact. And what next? Want to create a contact? So create contact. So what do we need to create a contact? First name, last name, and a phone number. This is an arrow function. Right, so we're going to do return again. And who knows why we're doing a return of the DB any or DB1?
It's the promise part of it, right?
Yep.
Like saying, like, don't do, like, we're going to get back to you. We're going to give you this information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so PG promise, these database queries return a promise. And so the way that we're designing these functions is whoever uses them will get a promise that they can then attach a .then to, and then work with the data however they want. Does that make sense? And the example of that is in here, where Bonnie at the bottom, so ran a get all contacts. This was the one that she wrote a couple days ago. .then, and then you take the data, and then we were just sending the data as a JSON, kind of stringified JSON. So cool. So this one, create a contact, return DB, and then 1, and I'll say why 1 for a create in a second. So what's this one going to look like?
Insert into.
Okay, insert into.
Is it contacts?
Contacts. And we want to specify the fields. So first name, last name, and phone number. Values. And then we'll put in the 3 values. And so in this case, we can do just the same way we're doing it, $1, $2, $3, and then give it an array with 3 arguments.
This is so cool, this whole array thing with the 3 arguments.
Yeah, right? It is kind of cool.
So then it would be first name, last name, phone number again, right?
First name, last name, phone number. Cool. And right now, we could test this, and there are a handful of ways we could test this. Probably the just dead simplest way is to right here call the function. And so then next time the node server restarts, so I don't think we've started the node server, but next time we run our server, it's going to require this file. It's going to run that, and we can just see if it creates contact. So create contact, and what's the name?
Sally.
How did you? I was thinking the same thing. Sally field.
Oh, nice. 8675309.
8675309EIN. All right. So go to the terminal. What was this? Live. Oh no, what is it? Lectures, live coding. 7. Okay. Unhandled promise rejection warning. No data returned from the query. Oh,
You didn't seed your data, you didn't do the scripts to
the database is seeded. And actually this succeeded.
Oh, it worked.
But the error that we're getting, anybody have an idea of why we're getting this particular error?
Deprecation.
There's an error somewhere in one of your prompts.
Yeah, and it's even telling us which query it is. Yeah. Yep. Say a little bit more about that.
So certain queries like select from automatically return, but insert into does not automatically return.
Yeah.
So you have to add at the end of it returning whatever you want to return.
Say that again, James.
So if you're doing a query like select from in one of these functions, it's automatically going to return the data that you need. But if you're doing an insert into query, it doesn't know to return unless you specifically tell it, I need you to return data.
And that's because we have to return in promises, right? Is that what it's saying? It's an unknown promise?
So
Right. So no data is getting returned out, but nothing's getting returned from the promise.
well, the specific reason that error popped up, and you're absolutely right, James. The specific reason we got that error is because we use this one. Because this is saying we want exactly one result from this query, and we didn't get any results. And so it said, whoa, promise problem, we didn't get any results. So if we change this to db any, or I think you can do db query, and then took this back out, it should work without the returning. So if we, yeah, so no error, and we should have, well, I guess I don't know if it added another Sally field. Let's just try this one more time. So we're gonna node server.js. Oh, got to restart it. There we go. There are Sally fields. Excellent.
So what's best practice in that? To return within the SQL query or to just do db.any?
So I like doing db.1 here and then returning something, because then you can check, like when you run this query, you can check what the result was. And you can check and see. So first of all, it will error if nothing is returned. And if something is returned, you can, if you want to, look at what that is.
In this case, it's more testable.
Say that again?
It's more testable. That's why you're thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, more testable, and you know, it's one way to do it. It's not the only way to do it, but it allows you to get a bit more information from the database.
So you're just doing predictability.
Cool. So db1 returns star, and let's just try this one more time. Syntax error at or near return. Returning. Great. So server restarted, no errors. We can go and see all our Sally fields and delete all but one. Cool.
We should have used the delete function to delete all the Sallys.
Well, we don't have a delete function yet, but why don't we make one? So delete contact. And what is this going to take in?
The first name, the last name, and the phone number. No, an ID.
An ID. Yep. And return db. Now, I'm actually not sure when you do a delete, if you can do a returning and what that returns. I'm not sure. So just to be safe right now, we'll do an any. And what's the query?
Delete from.
Delete from.
And is it delete all from? Or is it just?
I'm going to have to look this up. Post RESTful delete. So delete from table where, and then yeah, I don't know what that returning does. Causes delete to compute and return values based on each row actually deleted. So I guess it might return the row that was actually deleted. Yeah, okay. So delete from contacts, values, oh no, not values. What would go here? Where, yeah, and so it's contact, I think it's contact ID. Yeah, contact ID equals $1. And then we give it the ID here. Does this make sense so far? So just to test this one, just for fun. So I'm going to stop nodemon so we can control how many times this runs. We've created Sally field. So let's, oh, and we've probably created some more now. Delete contact. And then which one do we want to delete? Let's delete 15. And so let's just see if this runs. So delete contact 15, and then let's and take in some data and console log this was deleted etid data. So everybody get what we did there? It's a promise. Give it a then to console log what we're going to see what it gives us back. So to the terminal, we run node server.js. It says this was deleted, and it didn't show us anything. Oh, we didn't give it a returning. Returning star. Let's try.
Is she deleted though?
So yeah, let's check and see if she's deleted. 15 is deleted. So let's try deleting 16 and see if we can figure out what it's giving us back. So restarting the server. So it's an object. We could dig into that more, but let's not do it now. So we know that delete contact works. So we got rid of 15 and 16. So let's jump back and write at least one of these routes, and we can come back to the update. Can come back to the update later. So we need to export these. Let's export get contact, delete contact, and is that it? Create contact. Okay. And so now in our, what's that?
A comma after the create contact.
Yeah, that's okay. So
It is? They don't care about commas?
yeah, so in, oh, well, I didn't have one here,
Yeah.
but it's okay to have a trailing comma in JavaScript, not in JSON. That may bite you in the butt at some point. Everybody get what I got some kind of like furrowed brows. You can have a trailing comma here, even if there's not another element. Okay, so in our routes, let's bring in our database const db equals require, and then what's the path? Going back out, database utilities. So let's do our get contacts route. Okay, so we've got router, get contacts. What do we want here?
So we want to get all contacts function, right?
Mm-hmm.
All requests.
Yeah, so we can do db.get all contacts. I'd actually like to destructure these. So get all contacts, get contacts. We can do the rest in a minute. So that way we can access the functions just directly. So get all contacts, doesn't take any arguments, and then what? Which is kind of a pun. And then what? Because it's a then. Did you know there's something called a pun off, Bay Area pun off, and it's like a bunch of people get into a room and just tell puns for like an hour.
Oh my God.
It's a competition. My friend goes to it. So then, what do we want to do with the data that's given back?
You want to stringify it or parse it?
Yeah, so ultimately we'll want to send this back in some sort of pretty JSON, like, clear JSON format. For right now, let's just see if we can send back anything just kind of as text. So let's do response res.send data and just see what it pumps back. So let's make sure our server is running. npm run start. Okay, good. And we'll go to Postman. You guys use Alfred? Anybody use Alfred? It's this kind of replacement for Spotlight, but you can define words like hello, and you can run all sorts of commands. There's a clipboard viewer. It's quite cool. So Postman. So let's save. There we go. Okay, so our URL is http localhost 3000, and then it's API, because that was the start of our route. Remember, we made this router and then put it after API. So API, and then our route is contacts. So if we make a GET request to this, God willing, this should give us something. Hey! And it's in a pretty useful format too. So we've got a list of the contacts as an array. Yeah, I mean, this is basically what I would want to send. And Express has seen that this was an object, converted it, and then interpreted it as JSON. So we use just res.send, but the content type here is application JSON, which means Express knew to turn it into JSON and to send that content type along. And what status code do we want to give to this?
Oh, if it's successful, 200.
Yeah, if it's successful, 200. And if for some reason this fails, we could do a catch and catch the error, and then response status. And depending on what happened, we might want to give back a different error. But you know, I don't actually know off the top of my head what would be the best. Yeah, some sort of 400 error. So we'll give back 400 for right now, knowing that we may want to. Is this a good status code? We'll come back to that. And then we can send, whoa. There was an error getting this thing. And actually, because we're making a REST API that is sending back JSON for everything, what we'd really want to send back is some JSON of, you know, like error. There was an error accessing this information. And yeah, so if we could somehow trigger that. Let's see, let's go up here, and in get all contacts, we'll return a promise that's rejected. And so this won't even get called. So this is just to test it out. Body error, there was an error accessing the information. So you want to return JSON in any case so that they can have something to work with consistent.
I have a question about, this is a spec regarding question, and some of the times I see like we want a response 200, but Postman always gives you a status 200 even if you don't declare it in your script or in your code.
Mm-hmm.
So, but like on certain projects, even like when we were going through the modules, I think there's like where it's like and return a 200.
Yeah.
So we need to hard code that in.
Yeah. So with the status, there's some good reasons, and then we'll wrap up here. There are some good reasons to set your status, even if you know or think that the status might otherwise be in there. Someone reading this code can really easily see what the status of this response is without kind of having to guess about it. So even though status 200 would automatically be sent with this, I might include it there.
Okay.
And you just, you can know that you don't have to, but in this case, it makes it a little more explicit.
Can I ask one more really quick question?
Yeah.
Request response. The full word, the short version. I heard Puneet wants to see the full version.
It's personal coding style preference, and if Puneet says use request and response rather than rec and res, then when you're working with Puneet, then do that.
Okay. Do you know if he does say it, or if that's just a rumor to scare us?
I don't know who would have created that rumor to scare you.
Jared said that too. Just try to practice being very terse.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm sympathetic to that. So someone reading this code might not immediately know what rec and res is, although most people probably would. So that would be an argument for using request and response. I leave it to you. So we've got the database functions, we've got our first API route, and we can work on the rest next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
I like the golf applause.